right. We are live and welcome to Business Matters 2025. This is the 10th topic that we have covered since we started way back, I think actually my first year at Brock. What I would like to do is start by acknowledging the land on which Brock University is situated. It is traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of the Indigenous people. So as I said, I am Todd Green. I'm a marketing professor at Brock University, Goodman School of Business. I'd like to welcome our panelists and have each one of you introduce yourselves. We have amazing experts together with us tonight to talk about responsible management and responsible leadership and what it means to go beyond profits and manage and operate with some purpose. So I will go random and according to me, from what I can see, Mark would be the first person to introduce themselves.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, everyone. My name is Mark Carpenter. I'm currently the Chief Growth Officer at a company called ChangeMakers. We are a marketing, communications, and Indigenous advisory business. I also sit on the board of directors, or the national board of directors for Make-A-Wish Canada, kind of in my spare time. And a bit of background on me, I've been kind of a career advertising marketing agency person about 20 years now, mostly in Toronto. I also had a short stint in New York. I've worked for some of the big global networks like Publicis and BBDO, and also some small startups like No Fixed Address and ChangeMakers.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Rhonda.
Thanks, Todd. Happy to be here. Rhonda Klosler, Chief Operating Officer at RSM Canada, which is a national professional services firm. We have 6 offices across the country. I'm a Brock graduate by background. I graduated in '93, actually, and it feels like it can't be that long, but it has been. I have an honors BBA and a co-op accounting option as well. So I am a CPA. Received my FCPA distinction in 2021. Huge Brock advocate. I continue to stay involved in the university, both through recruiting at Goodman. Over 50 Brock grads work at RSM in the Toronto office, as an example. So really, really proud about that. And also sit on a number of advisory councils, and I participate in events like today as well. Like Mark, I like to give back, and I think that's an important element of leadership, and I focus on youth engagement. So I actually am the chair of the board of Junior Achievement of Central Ontario, and that's a wonderful program if you're aware at all of JA, but it's building the business entrepreneurs of the future, so which is fantastic. Really big believer in and promoter in the importance of a strong corporate culture that I believe strongly it differentiates organizations, both from a client perspective, but also for talent when you do it well. And today's conversation is really important to me in that. And in my view, an element of responsible management is about DE&I and creating an inclusive environment. So here at RSM, as it relates to sustainability, it's certainly not my area of expertise, but we have a sustainability practice that supports clients in different ESG diligence and risk assessments, data analysis, and also helping clients develop strategies around ESG. So that's a little bit about me and what I'm up to. So
awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. Christina.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Christina Garnett, and I am the Chief Customer and Communications Officer for neuemotion. It's an agency that works across brands for video content strategy and digital strategy across advertising and organic. In the past, I ran customer advocacy at HubSpot, where I built out our different programs for influence, for advocacy, and for experiential opportunities for them at events like Inbound. Before that, I was a strategist for ICUC, where I worked with Fortune 500 brands, did social listening, worked on crisis management whenever there was things happening around COVID and the pandemic. And then previous to that, I was a teacher where I taught math for 5 years for middle and high school students in the public and private sector. I regularly, just like everyone else on this call, I'm a firm believer in pro bono work and nonprofits and how they can make a difference. Every year, I tend to adopt a nonprofit, and I help them build up their infrastructure and their planning, whether it be fundraising infrastructure, whether it be how they work with building community and engagement around other charities, nonprofits, and the government sector. And I'm here excited to talk about responsible management and leadership.
Thanks so much. Dave.
Hi, Todd. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here today. So, just like Todd, I'm a professor at Goodman School of Business, a research chair, LCBO Hennessy Research Chair on the topic of inclusion, passionate teacher and researcher in the areas of leadership. So I'm happy to be here because it's really a topic that is close to my heart. So I do hope that we're going to have an amazing discussion this evening. Thank you, Todd.
I think we already have, and we're 7 minutes in, so yeah, really good start. I wanted to ask you, because we've actually had this question posed to us when we came up with the topic. So what does responsible management mean? So what does it mean to you, or what does it include, in your opinions?
Did you want to kick it to one of us, or just jump in?
Anyone can jump in. Sorry.
I'm very uncomfortable with silence, so I'll jump in. So, I mean, it is, we're, sorry, go ahead.
I can go first. Actually, I can just give you a bit of a scholarly background here, and the rest can build off that, perhaps, if that's helpful, Todd. So, yeah, so now what is responsible management? And what I would focus on here is less on the process and more on the leadership aspect of it. And then we can see where that goes, right? So now, to address that question, I would look at the origins, first of all. Like when we say responsible leadership, I mean, when I just look at it, having done research in leadership, I would say that this is something that actually showed up about 2 decades ago, right? So, but it has evolved quite a bit since then. And I do believe that really the term responsible management leadership started to pick up around 2015. Now, this is very important because that is when the United Nations actually launched its 17 SDGs, and these targets were set for 2030, right? Now, the catch, though, is that while we've made progress towards these SDGs, I've recently read that nearly 3/4 of these goals are unlikely to be achieved by the deadline. Now, if you combine that with the wave of corporate scandals we've seen over the years, it begs the question, where has leadership and our models of leadership failed? Now, yes, when you look at literature, you say, yeah, we have traditional leadership theories that talk about ethical leadership, etc., about servant leadership. But the important problem here is that much of this thinking, I would say, misses a crucial piece of the puzzle, the stakeholder dimension. So the thing is that when we talk about responsible leadership, we have to understand that leadership does not happen in a vacuum, right? It takes place in a complex ecosystem. So what we're seeing is that decisions by corporate leaders ripple out, right? So they don't affect just employees, but shareholders, communities, suppliers, environment, and even future generations. So in that sense, leadership is more than just guiding a team or inspiring followers. So it's like navigating a wide web of interdependencies. Now, what is really interesting here, and something I've seen quite a bit, is that responsible leadership is also a socially constructed idea. Now, what does that mean? That actually implies that people just interpret it differently based on their values, experience, and worldviews. But that is where the problems start, you know. It's like if everyone has a different perception of what responsible leadership entails, that's when people start to misunderstand each other. And that's where it becomes difficult as well to have a conversation, you know, because we speak along each other. We don't understand each other because of the fact that we have different perceptions of responsible leadership. So just to give you an example, so let's say that some believe that embracing AI and leading the charge in technological development, well, if a leader is doing that, they're so-called advancing a country's competitive edge. Now, in theory, this could lead to wealth creation and benefit the broader community. So in that spirit, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with the renowned management scholar, Don Siegel, but he argued that responsible leadership is fundamentally about meeting the needs of shareholders. Now, if we all recall something from our economics classes, you might have heard of Milton Friedman, Mark, but his famous doctrine was actually the social responsibility of business is to increase its profit. So according to that view, corporate leaders are doing their job and contributing to society by maximizing profits within ethical and legal boundaries. Now, let's pause here for a moment, okay? Because from the perspective of an environmentalist, that logic might sound like, well, that's irresponsible, right? AI consumes massive amounts of energy. We all know that. Others might raise concerns about automation, job loss, arguing that if we don't put the right guardrails in place, we risk social fallout and massive scale. So where does that leave us? And what kind of definition should we be using of social responsible leadership? So what we're seeing is that we're starting to shift away from a purely economic Milton Friedman perspective. So today, it's more of a hybrid concept, I would say, drawing from ethical leadership, authentic leadership, servant leadership. And that's where we're going to add a stakeholder lens. So my definition then would be a responsible leader is someone who understands the interconnectedness of systems and their own role within it. They're guided by ethics and values. They build on long-term relations within a range of stakeholders, and they drive positive change towards sustainable development. So that's a mouthful, but there are a couple of important elements there, right? So first of all, a person who is self-aware of the ecosystem in which they operate, the impact that they have on all the stakeholders, and if they make decisions, if they take action, it should always be embedded in a values-based system, okay? So that's the kind of leadership we need more of, I would say, especially now as we face global challenges that no single company or country can tackle alone. So this is something that should not just be held by one person. It's a collective effort, I would claim.
Yeah, that was, to me, I kind of went Google search and I thought, okay, what are the experts at Google telling me responsible business leadership is, responsible management? And one of the things that was interesting in the definition is they said you have to acknowledge that there's an ethical and a social and environmental impact, but it didn't really speak a lot to action. So then I started worrying about, okay, is there an attitude behavior gap potentially to say, okay, we acknowledge that we're doing bad stuff, but we're not going to do anything about it. But we have acknowledged, therefore we are following responsible management. Would anyone else like to include your view of responsible management?
I'd like to add something. I loved what Dave said. I think it's thoroughly succinct and really kind of encapsulates what it looks like. I think that it's important to note, though, that responsible management has been corrupted. Just the very definition of what it looks like has been corrupted. I think if you talk to most CEOs around the world and you ask them if they're a responsible leader, they are going to say that they are, with the understanding of responsibility to whom. And so there's going to be that acknowledgement of, well, I'm actually providing value to the shareholders. The board is happy with me. we're able to grow, we're able to do all these things, versus someone else who might say that they are responsible for the social norms that they've created, the culture that they're building for their employees, or the environmental ramifications that they're avoiding by the actions that they're taking. So I think that it's very necessary to understand that, just as I agree that we need more responsible management and leadership, I think it's also worth noting that there are conversations happening right now on social, on Twitter, right now, where people are completely corrupting that idea and using it as a means to defend really unethical decisions.
Just, Christina, just a question around that to add to the conversation. But what do you think? I wouldn't disagree with you. So what do we need to do as leaders within our organizations to root our people? And I mean, again, what is the framework we need to establish to, I guess, avoid that corruption? I'm curious on your perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we need to do is, as leaders, we need to hold ourselves to the same standard that we would hold employees. So for example, there's this culture of like the rock star CEOs that are able to go on yachts, that are able to go to parties, that are able to do all these things, that are able to show up and be in the press and have all these different things. However, if their employees were behaving the exact same way, were doing the exact same things, there would be an issue with that. I think a really great example of that is when Elon Musk went on the Joe Rogan podcast and was smoking weed on the podcast. Because he's Elon Musk, that was acceptable. However, if anyone else that was an employee of his was doing that exact same behavior, they would be reprimanded, if not lose their job. And so I think as leaders, we need to hold ourselves to the same standard as the people who are working for us. And then we also need to be held accountable. I think that in a lot of terms, when we think about leadership, we know what it is when we see it because we're so used to seeing what it looks like when it's bad. And so I think that we need to create a culture where we are able to constructively say, this is not appropriate for who we are as a business. This is not appropriate for who we are as leaders and who we want to model leadership to our employees. Because right now, especially in the United States, we're seeing a massive divide between the leaders and the non-leaders, where the people who are the ICs of the world, who are the employees, they're constantly worried about being laid off. They're constantly worried about being restructured. There is absolutely no psychological safety in the workplace. And then they'll see their leaders, and their leaders have like a brand new watch, or their leaders are flying out to offsites around the world. And so it's very much showing this disconnect between what leaders are living their life and how their employees are. And I think that's something that we don't need to blast it so much as we need to have a very careful, thoughtful understanding of, is this really what you're showing your employees? Is this the conversation that you're having? I think one thing that's really, this is going to be a little controversial, but I think it speaks to the idea of, if a CEO lays off a certain layer of people from their staff, they are essentially cutting a cost center and are technically making themselves more profitable, which is seen as a good thing by the board, and then usually get a bonus. So like, you're cutting people's livelihoods off and then rewarding the person with the hatchet. And those people who are not only feeling bad because they've lost their jobs are now seeing that someone was not only able to keep their job by making that decision, but was monetarily rewarded for it. That's very problematic. And I think that when we think about leadership, yes, there's going to be tough times. Yes, there's going to be times where you have to cut costs. Yes, there's going to be times where you have to be very strategic about, where are we going to grow? Where are we going to shrink? Are we going to have cost centers that we need to look at? But I think that it sets the wrong message when, if the whole if the whole leadership team can like fly off to an offsite in a different country or to like this great resort, and then the people who are left behind are like, I was doing the work and I'm seeing what I have and what I don't have. I think that as leaders, whether we look at it from a social economic policy, from board member and shareholder value, or from the environment, I think that our messaging needs to match. I think that's also indicative of the companies that have gotten in trouble for their responsible leadership when it's greenwashing, because it was a PR message, it was a comm strategy instead of like something that they actually lived and breathed. I think that people are paying more and more attention to what their CEOs are saying, what C-suite's doing, what leaders are doing versus what they're saying. Like, does the action match the press release? Does the ad match what the cultural value is for the people who are customers and who are employees. And I think as long as there's that disconnect, people aren't going to change because there's no reason for them to make those necessary changes.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, not nearly as eloquently as you have articulated, but at the end of the day, I think it was Dave that referenced, you have to have a values-based system. And, as leaders, we set the tone, and you have to live by that. At RSM, we have, we have 5 behaviors that we lead with in every conversation, whether it's internal with our team members or with our clients, and we call them the 5 C's. And it's about showing up as a caring individual. It's about being courageous in our conversations, being critical thinkers, being collaborative, and curious. Asking questions. And we're in the business of professional services. We sell what's between our people's ears, so being curious is really important. But honestly, I've said as a leader at RSM, the 5 C's. Those are like the behaviors of decent people. I'm a parent. Like, I want my kid to demonstrate those 5 C's every day. So as leaders, we have to live by that and show up. And I actually think it's interesting because I think, the people we hire today they expect it, right? Right. And our clients expect it as well. So it is evolving, I think. I mean, it's different. I think I don't live in a regulated world. I mean, I live in a regulated, we have a regulatory body, but from a reporting perspective, I'm a private business. So I don't have those same sort of obligations from a reporting perspective. But again, it comes back to me, it's be a decent person, set the appropriate tone, and then live by them. Because the moment you don't live by them, that's the toxic environment. Right? That's when the bad behavior starts, and I refer to it as a critical illness, and you have to deal with it immediately. So.
Yeah, and Mark, you're coming from a different background than, well, I guess you and Christina have some overlap, obviously. And I teach marketing, but I'm interested in, when you're running an agency, what responsible management or responsible even marketing would include for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on a lot of it. It comes down to, making ethical decisions. I think being a good human first is, and that is based around your purpose, your values, your behaviors, what you tolerate, what you don't tolerate. Making ethical decisions for the business, for your staff, and for the community, and then operating with integrity and accountability. It's all kind of the same framework that we've talked about. I do think what's really interesting, as I reflect on my career, is how much those goalposts move over time. And it's actually remarkable when you think about what becomes important and then what sort of peters out. And you're hearing that a lot in the narrative now, especially in the US around WPP. They just issued like an annual report, and they removed any mention of DEI. And that's, it's pretty remarkable, given the kind of the commitments they had made, just a few short years ago. But you see the pressures that come in as you start to, as you get into tougher economic times, and it goes from, an asset to a cost pretty quickly. And so it really comes down to personal integrity as a leadership and a leadership team, and having that sort of tight cabinet as your leadership group, and making sure that you all value the same things as it relates to the business. So, clearly this is a very meaty topic that we're jumping into here, because it's so, entangled in a lot of other narratives. And it's really interesting to see how corporate narrative and corporate policy is really bleeding into the individuals who work there, and then the broader community. It's becoming this integrated ecosystem that's only going to be more complex as we go. So it's great that we're talking about it now, at a university level, because this is going to be a harder thing to navigate, in 6 months, let alone, 3-4 years from now.
I don't know if you did this intentionally, but Mark, amazing segue to my next question. So thank you so much. I actually wanted to ask you all what you expect responsible management to look like going forward, or are there new areas that you expect to fall under responsible management? But anyone who wants to take that.
Well, I think, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think we'll probably all have an opinion on this, but AI, I think, is the biggest one right now. I don't know if the other panelists are having those conversations kind of at the executive level. But, you know, given the fundamental change that's having on our business and society, you know, this brings up a lot of questions around integrity and things like data sovereignty and all these issues. So I think, you know, it's kind of unfortunate that, you know, some other things are sort of falling to the back burner, and AI is becoming the hottest topic for us as it relates to responsible management. And you know, I'm in the service business as well. So things like, you know, if we're using AI to be more efficient, does that cost savings, should that, you know, go on to the client or not? Or is it, you know, just, you know, pat ourselves on the back because we're being more efficient? So it's really interesting. And then, you know, we're in a creative ideas business. So, you know, do you own the idea if you're using artificial intelligence to help, you know, either be a strategist or a creative partner in it, you know, rights usage, all that sort of stuff. So it's a really fascinating time. So I would say, you know, that's certainly taking up a lot of airtime in our space. And then it also, you know, it follows the political narrative. So in my business, we do a lot of work with Indigenous communities. So that's also a major focus. And you know, how, you know, we do a lot of work with settlements with the federal government and how that money is getting dispersed to communities. You know, there's a lot of tension in those conversations as well, and raises a lot of questions around, you know, responsible management and leadership. So I would say that the most fascinating thing is that, again, the pace that it changes, but those are kind of the few that are really, you know, in our weekly discussion, I would say.
Yeah, Dave and I are really lucky that none of our students have ever used ChatGPT to help.
I bet, yeah.
I think it's no, definitely has never ever read like an answer to a prompt. So we're good on that. But I'm sure AI is.
We have, like, I'm sure everyone on the call, but every business meeting we have, it's like, oh, do you mind if we record this and, you know, use Copilot, right? And within seconds after the meeting, it's summarized and, you know, actions, and it is crazy. I mean, from my lens, I think it's interesting. I mean, certainly, well, AI, yeah, all of that, Mark. But I think about sort of the why behind sort of, I'll call ESG has kind of fallen out of face, right? And has there been so much focus around the reporting requirements? Organizations have been so focused on that, they're really not even thinking about what being sustainable means. Like, and if you could think about sort of how do we do sustainability better, right? And from an efficiency perspective, I mean, how do we, you know, again, back to your point, like manage costs around that? How do we leverage technology and data to help companies manage those the risks around it? And I feel like in our business, leveraging technology and data is helping, or like we are leveraging technology to help clients manage their risks and reporting ESG sustainability risks rather, and then the reporting around it. So I think that's a huge trend. You know, we use mega data to help, as an example, without naming any names, but large global organizations that have assets all over the world. How do we use, you know, data to identify the risks they have, the environmental risks they have, quantify the environmental risks they have in the countries where their assets are dispersed, and then how do they manage that risk, right? So it's been, you know, that how we leverage technology to help advance solving problems for clients has been really interesting, and I think that will continue to be a big element of our practice. Now, in turn, how you, to your point, Mark, if organizations are saving, becoming more efficient and saving money, what they do with that savings becomes a bigger question, right? Is it just going into the pockets of the shareholders, or is it being passed along to their clients? We haven't gotten to those conversations yet, so, but certainly an interesting element. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I do think also one thing to consider too is, because of the economic conditions of the world right now and the fact that it feels like everything is kind of looming towards a recession, I think it's important to note that it's very easy to have integrity in levels of abundance. It's very hard to have integrity in scarcity. And so I think you're going to see a shift towards responsible management and leadership in terms of survival. So they're going to use AI more. They're going to cut costs. They're going to work with companies that they never would have before because they don't see eye to eye. They're going to do that because survival becomes the mark of responsibility. And so I think you're going to, just as we've kind of seen with ESGs and DE&I being removed, I think that you're going to see even more layers removed from companies as we move from an abundance mindset into a scarcity mindset. So you're going to see CEOs that are talking about they're trying to save their business, they're trying to keep it afloat, they're trying to keep it going when consumers maybe have lost trust or there's not as much money in the economy to go around. And so I think that you're going to see a massive shift towards how CEOs are talking about being, what is a good leader? Right now, it might be holding fast to your guns and really kind of showing up with integrity. And 6 months from now and a year from now, if we see anything like what the 2008 collapse was, especially in the United States, I think you're going to see a lot more messaging in terms of survival leadership versus like being a good person. It's going to be more about like, are we keeping the doors open? Are we able to pay our bills? Are we able to do that? And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I do think that you're going to see that kind of behavior start to appear as we're seeing the stock market drop, as we're seeing more and more kind of markers for recessions.
Yeah, it reminds me of the beginning of COVID. I feel like the same narrative. One of my favorite sayings, I don't know who to credit to, but is, a principle is only a principle when it costs you something.
Yes.
And where that's really being put to the test now. And so another kind of vector is I think in the past few years, I'll speak personally, like our agencies jumped on a lot of different causes because we felt like it was the right thing to do. We felt like there was pressure to do it, but you get a cause, and that's all great. But I think now, as when times get tougher, it's going to be more about narrowing in on what your cause is. And I'm talking more from like your CSR sort of positioning. So I think that you're going to see, narrowed focus and on my Make-A-Wish side, we're seeing that on the fundraising side, whereas some companies give to an environmental cause and then give to Make-A-Wish and they'll give to 3 or 4 things, and now the dollars are really getting tightened and focused, and I think that's another trend that's going to continue so long as we're in this economic position.
Yeah, I used to do a class exercise with my students in an ethics lecture where I'd say, okay, your company is committed to a 5-year agreement with a local charity that helps underprivileged kids, but now it's not, the same economic conditions as it was when you started that agreement. Yeah. Do you either lay off staff, or do you keep the agreement, or do you cut a bit of your support of the charity, and what does it look like to stakeholders if you're firing employees and staff, but then still, say giving $10 million away to local charities? And I wasn't sure what to expect, but some of the students were actually getting angry at each other because I made them play stakeholders, they were fuming at the people who said they would get rid of the cause, and others like, are you crazy? You can't lay off staff. So I think this being good to do well conversation will probably tighten even more and make it laser focused so that it's strategic, or it's something that's a clear fit between who you are as a company. So like the Cisco Academy model, for example, versus if Cisco said, we love puppies and babies, so here's $10 million for the SPCA. Cisco instead is training people to work within that industry, and then it helps the entire industry. So yeah, I think, I don't know, we probably all like companies to give away money because they have big hearts, but I'm also okay. I work in a business school. If they are strategic with it and make good decisions, I think I'm okay with it as well. And I don't see a problem with that. So yeah, maybe that makes me more cold-hearted than people would hope for me to be. I don't know. But when it's something that helps the community and helps the business at the same time, I think those are the kinds of things we'll see more of with responsible management versus here's our pet cause of the CEO and it has nothing to do with their ops, and it's a big check moment in front of the a hospital or something along those lines. I think it's just gonna be like, what's our ROI? I was really thinking our tagline for tonight could have been the ROI of being a decent person, because some of you talked about being a good person, and I often do wonder, because we always hear nice guys finish last or nice people finish last at the same time, and I'm like, is there an ROI on being a responsible leader or a responsible manager or known for being a responsible company? I feel like we have that negativity bias. So if they're an irresponsible company, I don't really want anything to do with them, for example.
Yeah, it's like your return on integrity, right? Would be the new ROI.
Yeah. Hey.
Well, I think it comes down to long-term versus short-term return.
Yeah.
And so the whole like nice guys finish last, that's kind of like, it's long game. And it's you do it in micro moments, and you prove it over time. Whereas being unscrupulous, you can see quick gains. And so I think it's very much short-term gains versus long-term gains. And the people who actually have the integrity, it doesn't feel like long game because they're just being themselves. They're just showing up the way they would show up. Whereas if you don't have that, it feels like a sacrifice to be a good person. You see what you're giving up with your principles versus someone who just sees the return if they're able to like go that extra step to be like, well, it's not really unethical. It's just not nice. And
Right.
So I think that's another reason why, especially with the economy, you're going to see a lot of like long-term initiatives that they're not going to have quick wins. They're going to be thrown by the wayside because they're going to do something else in favor of some like short-term gains.
Yeah, I ask my students about whether it's legal or ethical and whether it's optional. I sort of feel like I don't think it makes a nice company or a responsible company if they don't break the law, if that makes sense too. But to your point, I feel like it might tighten to the point of, okay, let's talk to the lawyers. Are we allowed to do this to make decisions versus does this feel like the right thing to do as well? And I often say to my students, you don't get a cookie in the mail because you stopped at the stop sign on campus. It doesn't make you an ethical driver because you don't go 250 miles per hour on the road. You're just following the laws. And but I think what's going to happen is they might sort of scale back to what's legally required of us to maybe not get in trouble or be viewed as a bad corporate citizen. I don't know. That's sort of my pessimistic view potentially of what could happen.
But I think we already see big companies kind of showcasing that the law does not extend equally. I mean, a company with a massive legal team is going to be able to push back and get away with a little bit more than a small guy. And so I think that big companies are already kind of showcasing that they are willing to push the envelope to see exactly what they can get away with, or they are working in terms in places where there's lack of regulation. I mean, Todd, you know this with social media. There's an extensive gray area just if you mention regulation as a whole, and they're already doing things that I think we could all argue are unethical, but unless there's a legal precedent, they're able to tiptoe the line to see exactly how far they could go. And so I think that big companies already kind of have that understanding of how much legal power can we push into this, or can we lobby? Can we lobby people towards our cause? So even though they agree that maybe it's negative, we're able to help them with their cause, or we're able to make a concession here and there. I think that that's a huge way of looking at regulation, especially in the United States too, and how it hasn't really happened. Because I think if you'd gone back 10 years ago and told us that regulation would be a thing, I think we would all agree. And then here we are, and we've just had a couple meetings, and they've been broadcast, and a couple questions have been asked, but nothing really substantial has been executed.
Have all of you seen responsible management grow in importance in your careers? And do you expect that upward trajectory, or do you think it's like going to plateau for a while? Or I'm interested on your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I can start, but absolutely. And I think it's just, again, information is power, right? We're more aware. There's more transparency around it, and so I mean, our buyers have a totally different voice, right? Whether it's our constituents, whether that's client or talent. In my world, they have strong voices in the way they didn't when I started my career, and and they're, as I said earlier in my comments, I feel like the people we are attracting to RSM are demanding a certain behavior. Like there's an expectation that, you know, if they're going to work for us, they want us to do certain things, and or they come to us because we say we do those things, and we better follow through, right? So without question, it's grown in importance, and I think it will continue because, again, I think the buyers are, again, we're evolving. They're getting smarter, right? And they're demanding more and more. You see it every day in your life. Like you know, we're all, like I said, information is power, and you know, you have so much available to you, you know, on your phone in a second. Like it has changed behavior and expectations without question.
I completely agree.
Yeah, same here. I think it's changed with expectations of employees and clients, like you said. I mean, in my own career, like when I started, it wasn't a conversation, at least not a conversation that I was involved in. You know, I would say in like the 2010s, we started to talk, you know, on the advertising side. And, you know, maybe you'll agree, like you started to see more cause-related and purpose-related advertising coming out. You know, in Canada, a lot of it was to do around the environment initially. So that sort of started a bit of a change in narrative in the creative business. And then there were some compelling moments in the world that really, you know, fast forward to that discussion. You know, the first one was around Me Too, you know, in women's rights and equality in the workforce. That was a huge impact and a notable change. And then also in May of 2020 with George Floyd, that was another moment where that completely changed the way that we were looking at causes and what, you know, we were accountable for as people. We actually launched an agency on that Monday morning. And like, ironically, the photo of the agency was a bunch of old white guys sitting around a table. We were kind of saying that we were the anti that, but like the amount of pushback that we got in that moment was like, wow, this is incredible. So that really changed a lot. And, you know, with a younger workforce coming in, you know, they have more demands in this space, and I get it. I agree with it. So I think it is fundamentally becoming more and more important and changing. And of course the regulatory changes too. That's yeah, we are really kind of following the demand both from a talent and a revenue standpoint, and it's changing quickly. And certainly if I were to, you know, if I had a crystal ball to look back at when I first started to, you know, and compare that to where we are today, it's a different world in this sense.
I agree. I think social media is, because it's been able to amplify and democratize voice, you have that pushback. You have that ability to mobilize people. I think a great example in the United States is right now Target has been boycotted by massive groups of consumers since they dropped their DE&I initiatives. And so people have realized in a powerless state where you spend your money and where you spend your time is something that you do have control over. And so we're seeing more and more people mobilize over the causes that are important to them, and specifically going after and boycotting the companies that are counter to that. And I think Gen Z they're not only very vocal, but they're very passionate about what they think is a right or a wrong. And so I think as long as social media is a thing, and as long as it really democratizes that share of voice, you're going to continue to see calls for leadership. Now, whether those people will listen to that, I think it really comes down to, like, how much does it have to hurt Target before Target shifts? How much does the board have to lose before they say something has to change here because we can't continue to drop at the scale that we're dropping? And so I think there's a boundary over there, just like there's boundaries for most of us in terms of what we're doing, but it's going to continue to change. It's just, at what point does it have to get to for leaders to actively listen and say, I have to do something, I have to be different here?
Yeah, and it'll be interesting too, because the companies that remove these kinds of initiatives then see it as a stock price drop or market cap is pretty significant. I feel like they're going to look a lot worse if they reintroduce it because they've lost money. Do you know what I'm saying? It looks like, okay, for me, I feel like if you cave to stakeholder pressure to quote unquote do the right thing, I don't know. I'm not going to give them credit if they reintroduce it personally. I mean, we don't have Target in it's a long story, Christina.
Yeah.
Actually, short story. Sort of.
Yeah, it was like a 6-month story or something. Not successful. Anyways, so we don't have the opportunity to, we have to find Canadian equivalents to boycott. But it's fascinating to me that companies will do good stuff in response to stakeholder pressure and then be like, see, we're good, we're nice. And it's like, well, we kind of know why you're doing it. I wanted to ask, Dave, is responsible leadership a hot topic in your area of research, or do you expect it to grow?
Well, I've just been following this conversation with great interest because I usually look at it from a research perspective, right? And based on everything that has been said, I mean, I totally agree with you that there have been shifts, right, in terms of what responsible leadership entails, and whether it's going to become more important or not. Well, we're living through a meta crisis, right? So there are those overlapping global challenges where it's like a perfect storm coming together, right? We have geopolitical instability, climate change, economic inequality, etc., name it, you know. But at the same time, there's also that distrust in leadership, and that's the thing. Like, we're trying to solve it through responsible leadership, but in the first place, it's irresponsible leadership that actually got us into this trouble. So the thing is, how do we restore that trust in the first place? Because I mean, at its core, responsible leadership is the solution. But as we said earlier onwards, my biggest concern is that it's just going to be another type of washing, right? How do we fight that? How do we overcome that? What's the role of business schools within this narrative? Like, how can we contribute? How can we create the future leaders that identify with responsible leadership? And the thing about responsible leadership, based on what you were saying, actually, what I'm learning from this is that it's not going to be an easy road, right? It's going to take courage, long-term thinking, but also the willingness to swim against the current. And I think that is very important. That is very important because sometimes we have to question existing norms as well if we want to achieve positive change. So that's where I would say that key to all of this is authenticity. And we actually briefly touched upon that, right? Because I do believe that authenticity and the way we actually embed that into our curriculum, like preparing the future leaders, is that we focus on authenticity, because at its core, it's about being genuine, transparent, true to yourself. It's about integrity, self-awareness, and again, that courage to push against the status quo, the norms that, sometimes make it very difficult to change things. And again, I know that it sounds all a bit like utopia, but there are a lot of examples out there where we see that, I mean, yes, even in difficult times, you might say that we're just going to focus on the economic side of responsible leadership, right? Well, that famous quote by Milton Friedman that I was mentioning before about sustainable practice is about making sure that you keep your shareholders ready, because in the end, it's going to create wealth and people will be happy if they have the necessary money coming in, right? So the thing is that responsible leadership here is centering around doing the right thing, but at the same time achieving financial success. And just to give you a quick example here, it is possible because it just comes to my mind. It's a Danish company. It's Ørsted. I'm not sure whether you know Ørsted, but it's a Danish energy company, okay? And what they pulled off over the past decade, I would say, is nothing short of remarkable. So just to give you a bit of context, so in 2009, Ørsted was actually heavily dependent on fossil fuels. So they had about 85% of their energy came from the typical coal, oil, gas, etc. But the leadership team at that point actually also understood that it comes with problems, potential problems in terms of market risks, moral imperative to change. And they actually made the bold call in the sense that let's transform the business into renewable energy. And it was not just talk, you know, because nowadays, so Ørsted went all in, so they divested their fossil fuels and ramped up actually investment in offshore wind, committing to completely different energy mix. And now if we fast forward, so they flip their ratio to 85% of their energy now actually comes from renewable energy. So this is not just a story about sustainability. This is about business transformation. And the kicker here is that they're not only one of the greenest energy companies, they also became one of the most profitable ones. So market valuation shot up for them. And that brings us actually to the bottom line impact of responsible leadership. So Ørsted, I would say, is the living proof of that. It shows actually by doing the right thing for the environment, for future generations and society, it doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice profitability. In fact, it can actually unlock your growth. And I do know this is just one example, but I do believe that there is a future for responsible leadership in the broader term of things. So, and I think that again, business schools have a very important role to play here. And it's not just about teaching a course on responsible leadership, it's making sure that you prepare those future business leaders and give them role models, focus on creating that sense of authenticity, you know, and because I do believe that is really crucial here.
I think, Dave, just on that, I mean, I think that, I mean, I've had conversations with the dean at Goodman about this, but I really think there's such an opportunity for business schools to partner with, you know, again, organizations that are demonstrating those behaviors, right? Ethical organizations. Because I believe strongly, like people, you can talk about all these behaviors, but people learn through story sharing. People learn when people tell a story, and right. So if you were in partnership with organizations that had, you know, strong, the right organizations that had that were ethical, you could, I mean, as a business owner, you're a researcher. That's your responsibility. I would love to have access to you to be able to have these conversations to learn, right? I can take that back to my business. I, in turn, offer real life experience to your students, right? To the students at Brock around what ethical leadership or what responsible leadership looks like. So I think there's a real opportunity to bring that you know, that your institutions, like universities and colleges, post-secondary, together with business to create that unique platform.
And then I'm happy you mentioned that, Rhonda, because I think it's through service learning and experiential education that there are great opportunities there. Because what I do in my classes, like all second-year students are going through a project and they work with NGOs, etc., and they're actually being exposed to some of the real life issues that are out there. You know, we're not only looking at the business perspective of things, but at least they start to understand that there's more than just a thing called business profit, right? So,
right.
And that's where they start to look at things very differently. That's where they start to develop that ethical thinking, you know, and that's where I see a lot of opportunity working together with businesses like yours, etc., where students are being exposed to this, you know. Whereas the thing, as you've pointed out, it's not just about textbook, it's about the real deal, just getting into like real experiences. And I think that is a great way to go about it, through that service learning, experiential education component.
I agree with that. I think it speaks, and I agree with what you said, Rhonda and Dave. I think it really also speaks to the fact that how do business schools normally operate? They come from a place of you need to have business acumen. You're going to go to this school and they're going to give you the networking. They're going to give you the case studies. They're going to give you the exercises. Maybe you'll do some internships, but you're basically getting that world. But as we've discussed on this call, it's the being human part. It's the being a good person part. So if you're teaching people how to be the business person, but you're not teaching them how to be a good human, then the business school is literally putting them on a course to be a leader, but not necessarily a good leader. And so I think as much as we focus on IQ, we need to focus on EQ. So what are the ramifications of business schools having a very strong structure, but they're opening it up? Like you said, you're working with NGOs. You're able to see what this looks like. It's kind of the idea of like, you want to be a lawyer? Fantastic. You're going to have to do some pro bono cases. Not just to learn, but to understand how what you do can be used for good, that it can be used for people who can benefit you, but not in a monetary way. And so I think having that that hybrid approach of how do we prepare them from a business perspective and how do we prepare them from a human perspective is incredibly crucial, because otherwise they're having to get that learning from some other place. And I think it speaks volumes. Like right now in the United States, they're trying to defund Sesame Street. The people that are telling you you should share and you should be kind. What does a future world look like where that's the only be a good person content that you receive? Where are we giving this education to be a good person, and what does that actually look like outside of preschool, outside of kindergarten? Like, where is the conditioning to be a good person? And I think having that in elements in an experiential as well as those business courses for the business acumen part, I think that's going to be huge in how we really prepare these people to be out in the outside world, but to understand there's going to be tough decisions, to understand that you're going to break some eggs, but you need to have the conscience and the economic and business acumen to be able to make sure that you're doing things and you're not just seeing spreadsheets with numbers, and those numbers are people. I think that by over-indexing on business acumen, but not caring about the human side, that's what happens when you get a room looking at a spreadsheet and they just say, this is a cost center, we need to cut it. But like, that cost center was people. That cost center was people who have kids. That cost center is people who are not going to be able to pay their bills. That missing piece is the divide between seeing that cost center and seeing the people behind it.
Christina, I am like, it's as though you were listening to a conversation I had with a colleague last week, because we had this whole conversation. We spend time developing people's technical skills. We turn them into what we believe are exceptional consultants, and then we put them into leadership roles, but they haven't got that sort of that baseline emotional intelligence. And I don't mean that in a diminishing way, but we haven't invested in them. And so like, that was happening at it's a huge gap in leadership today. And if we haven't, so again, where a university or college could help is by, to your point, like, well, I'd arguably even into like earlier education, but at a minimum, when you get to post-secondary, I think that's a critical skill to be a successful leader today. So
yeah, I echo that, because the reality is, and this is maybe a spicy comment, but for every Ben and Jerry's and Patagonia and energy company like you're referencing, there's millions of other companies that are for profit. And the likelihood is that you'll all land in companies at some point in your life that are for profit. And there's realities of working in those businesses. And not every company is going to be an activist. And that's just the reality. That's how you make money. But having that high EQ and knowing how to be a great human and do your best within that context is really important. And also when you're picking the company that you want to work for, because not every company is going to be able to support every cause or thing that you get behind. So you need to know what are your, non-negotiables, and what are things that you're willing to, maybe put good things into the world in your personal life to offset some of the things your company's doing or not. But it's, you have to be realistic too, that it's not always going to be this wonderful triple bottom line company that you're always going to get employed at. They're kind of few and far between. That's unfortunate, but it is true. So I think be a good human first, and then a good employee second. Well said, Christina.
Yeah, I often ask my students, are there specific organizations that you'd never want to work for, or specific industry? Because I think what happens to a lot of students in fourth year are sort of looking like, okay, what can I do with my degree right now? And I don't know what to do. And it's so many choices. And then, so what I try to do is sort of develop a bit of that moral compass to say, okay, are there specific industries that you would never want to work for? Or if there is an industry, but there's a specific organization within that industry, or are there marketing activities that you would never feel comfortable offering, for example, and that those companies offer those services? Or, how would you feel about responsibly marketing an irresponsible product, right? You can follow the legal requirements for what you think is a socially irresponsible product. I mean, we won't go down the sports gambling path too much, but it is basically like invaded Canadian sports landscape to unprecedented levels. And anyways, I worry about young people and sports gambling and how irresponsible the level of ads and the famous people who I clearly don't think they need the endorsement money that they're making off of it for people. It's, I mean, lotteries are regressive anyways. They're a regressive form of tax. Wealthy people don't play them nearly as much. So anyways, that's I threw out that there, but I feel like there are products that are at its core not responsible or good net for society. So if you say, well, we're marketing it in a responsible way, or, you know, we donate some money, I don't know if you can shine some of those organizations necessarily. If you are able to believe it at 7:01, and by the rule of law that will be strictly imposed upon us by me, we're supposed to go to Q&A. So we have sort of addressed actually one of the first audience questions, but just to revisit it a little bit, what sort of practical initiatives can business schools and industry experts take to promote responsible management? And then also this idea of preparing students and young professionals for responsible management leadership. When I was in this rotation program, I worked in commercial insurance a long time ago. It was my first career. And I sort of rotated through 4 different departments. There is nothing in our, and it's not, I don't think it's the fault of the company. This was 2001. It wasn't quite as important at the time. I don't remember anything about the future leaders being talked to about ethics or social responsibility or, you know, identifying causes to support. It was not part of the discussion at all. And the group of us was flown down to different cities and people brought in from different countries. We were all together. We were basically just told, you're working for the best broker in the whole world, you should be happy. There was never any discussion about responsible management. So what sort of initiatives do you think can be done? We talked a little bit about emotional intelligence courses. Knowledge mobilization is one thing I think of because my wife is doing her PhD in the area of well-being economics, and she used to work in mental health and addictions. And if you don't mobilize best practices and knowledge in healthcare, it can take up to 17 years for best practices to filter. And those are life-saving things, not just, you know, was the copy on that Instagram post really good or really bad? Or did you use the right number of hashtags, for example? Like, these are best practices in mental health and addiction practitioners. Those need to be shared. So I did wonder, are there other sort of practical things that you've seen or you've done yourselves or been part of that you think are effective? Sort of best practices maybe for the world's longest intro to a question. So I apologize.
I might be a bit biased because I'm obsessed with game theory, but I think that game theory should be taught in business school. I think that decision mapping, I think that, like, there's been so many news headlines where, and I've seen people react in a way that made no sense to me. And Todd, I know you've seen me on Twitter saying this, like, I need you to understand that third order effects exist. And you can't, it's very hard to be able to crystallize the outcomes of a lot of these decisions, 3, 4, 5 decisions along the way, without doing game theory. And so I would love to see more case studies where you have a leader who's made a decision, whether it's a layoff or whether it's a controversial decision or whatever, but to really build out the decision trees and see the second, third, and fourth order effects that can actually occur because of these, and then be able to do really thoughtful analysis of, this is what happened, how would you have done this differently? And I think what you did, Todd, when you were talking about your exercise of, like, either lay off people or cut the charity, yes, it gets very tenuous, but I think that it's important to have those exercises because in a lot of, we want to speak, it's like good or evil, it's easy or hard. A lot of business decisions, there is no like clear cut win. Like you're going to give up something there. It's not a clear, like, this is the easiest response to make. You're dumb if you do this. And so I think doing game theory, decision tree mapping, understanding third, fourth, fifth order effects, basically as far as you want to go, and understanding that, like, to be a leader, you have to make those tough decisions and then live by it. And so if it's going to be this or it's going to be that, How did you get there? What are the decisions that you had to do? And honestly, have your class watch The Good Place. The Good Place, the sitcom, it is an ethics masterclass. You want your students to take ethics, but they don't want to take it. Have them watch the sitcom, The Good Place. It will teach them ethics. You'll learn about Kant. You'll learn about the trolley problem. You'll learn about them in context with like everyday lives in a way that is funny and humorous and not boring. Game theory plus The Good Place. Like do the whole like roll the TV in like the good old days and have them watch that.
So the good old days for me was like, I am going to get to nap for half an hour when the teacher rolled in the TV. No, I'm just kidding. I can't imagine that I'm that person. But so Christina, I typically tell my marketing comms students to watch Mad Men. So would you say shift away from Mad Men and more focus on Good Place?
I do both. Shot chaser.
Okay. Yeah.
Do both.
I said to my students, oh, this role, that's like Peggy and just a bunch of blank stares. I was like, oh, man, really? Nothing?
Yeah. The good place, especially if you start, like once you get like halfway through the first season, you'll realize like it is a college level class on ethics. It's going to go through all of the philosophers. It's going to showcase it in theory as well as in practice. It's absolutely such a brilliant show. Like every single ethics student should have to watch that class, that show, because it really does brilliantly personify all of these like major ethics quandaries that you would have in a class.
I'm going back. I've watched it, Christina. I'm going back now with this lens, and I'll rewatch the first season.
It's so good. It's so good.
So we're helping boost Netflix numbers, which is really like that was my number one goal for tonight. Was
do you have an affiliate
for Netflix? Is that possible? I don't know. Yes, mission accomplished. No. We had someone who had a comment that they feel there's sort of like a vacancy or sort of a gap in leadership right now in businesses and in business schools. And so how do we address sort of this? I think what they're suggesting in the comments is that we have all these resources we have lots of resources, but we have a leadership gap. So I hadn't really thought of that as a potential question or comment coming into it. Do all of you? We're actually having a thunder and lightning storm in the middle of winter here. I feel like it.
Zeus is like, you're talking about leaders and I haven't been mentioned. Here's some thunder and lightning.
Yeah, like there's some apocalyptic.
It's here in Toronto as well, Todd. So
I don't necessarily think it's a gap. I think that it's because we live in a world of cult of personality. Like you see headlines when the plane crashes, you don't see headlines when the plane lands safely.
True.
And so I think that, I don't think it's a gap. I think it's you pay attention to the person who's lit themselves on fire. You pay attention to controversy. You pay attention to the cult of personality. So it's, if you look at headlines, the front page, like very first thing, like the lead is not going to be a warm and fuzzy thing. It's going to be something controversial. It's going to be somebody that like people don't like. I don't think it's that. I think that we and I would say the same thing on social, is that you control your algorithm. Otherwise your algorithm will control you. So look for the people who are doing a really good work. As Mr. Rogers says, like look for the helpers. Whenever you see someone doing a good job, amplify it. Great case in point is I absolutely am obsessed with Alexis Ohanian, the founder of Reddit. He, for me, is like the perfect example of responsible management and leadership. He left Reddit to basically leave a seat on the board so it could be more diverse. He is constantly championing causes for women's sports, for environmental sustainability. He's putting forth this new initiative, this new podcast, because he keeps seeing all this toxic masculinity and seeing all these people who are presenting themselves as leaders when they're not. And they're basically cult of personality. He's like, you need to hear the success stories from the people who are actually successful. And that means they're showing up for their families. It means they're building their empires, but it also means they're showing up and taking care of their kids. And so that is the example. So whenever you see someone doing a great job, amplify it, make their cult of personality louder, because the controversial stuff, the rage bait, that's going to be loud whether or not you do anything or not. I just don't think it's a gap. I think they're quiet. I think the good gets quiet instead of those headlines.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to celebrate the successes and the wins, right? But to your point, what gets the attention of the media are the, you know, the hook stories, right? Which aren't the happy stories. So I do think that, and by doing that, celebrating courageous leadership, right? Celebrating those stories that, again, sort of it will catch on. I don't know that we have a gap. I think that it's there. It's just it's not amplified enough. Even just, you know, this evening as this is an opportunity, right, to share those stories, to amplify what responsible leadership looks like. Like that's another example of it. So
yeah, I think we easily could have had our topic be irresponsible leadership and have just as much. So I mean, it's a simple framing thing, right? But if we called it, you know, has anyone seen the movie The Corporation, when they refer to corporations as psychopaths? Anyway, none of my students have seen it. I mentioned it the other day and they're like, oh yeah, no, never heard of it.
I was listening to a podcast last week around, not related to responsible leadership, although perhaps I should have, but it was around talent development. And, you know, we give people feedback, and, you know, we give them constructive feedback rather than giving people constructive feedback. Like, lean into their strengths, and like, how do you amplify their strengths as individuals? Because that, you get them to do more of that, and people will respond to that, right? It's you're reinforcing positive behavior versus asking them to do something differently, right?
Dave and I are in huge trouble now for our feedback to our students. This is
Lean into their strengths, Todd. Lean into their strengths.
You're like, you spelled my name right on the title page, so we'll start there. That's a win. It doesn't always happen. No, I'm kidding. We had another audience question. Someone was interested when companies will drop certain initiatives and then they will bring them back because they realize, so if, you know, the Target discussion that we had, if Target were to bring it back, how do we actually find the companies that do really care? I think that's at the heart of the question, is what they're, let me just sort of reread this really, really quickly. Yes, okay, sorry. The upfront is a little bit different from their final question, I think. Are there ways that consumers and employees can find brands whose responsible practices align with their true values? And so to me, I think this is coming from a potential graduate or someone who might be in fourth year and starting to look for jobs. And so I ask my students, when you're seeing job ads, are they talking about developing you as an employee? Are they talking about work-life balance initiatives? Are they talking about willing to invest in your training and things like that? And most of them are saying, I don't see that in job ads. So that sort of surprised me. I thought that would be, you know, hey, we do on-site yoga. Aren't we nice in more job ads?
I would also say, like look for organizations that talk about their values, that demonstrate their values, that talk about stewardship, giving back to their communities, including, you know, the communities where they work, but their communities include like their employees, right? Absolutely, like development opportunities, career opportunities, rotation opportunities. So there's a ton of information out there available. I just, you'll be able to find it, build a framework around what you value. Like, what is it that's important to you? To your earlier comments, Todd, like as someone looking for a new graduate looking for employment, like figure out what really motivates you, and then look for organizations that align to that. That's a recipe for success.
Yeah, and I think it's if an organization is doing something positive in the world, they will talk about it. Like, it is part of the brand strategy. So that's one place to look. But then I'm sure you would all do this anyway. But do your homework around, Glassdoor and Reddit and actual people who work there, and sometimes take that with a grain of salt too, because I also find on some of those platforms that people may have had a bad experience, so they'll want to go and shout about it, and that might not be completely indicative. I also think it's fine to reach out to people on LinkedIn or wherever who work there and just say, I'm interested. I'm not looking for you to, put my name forward or anything, but would just love, to understand your experience there as it relates to the values. So, I think people are generally open to talking about their current jobs.
I would also look at the leadership of any place that you're looking at working. And especially as more and more leaders are trying to position themselves as thought leaders, especially on LinkedIn, see how they are talking. Like, for example, if they are up for an award, who do they give credit to? Did they thank their team, or did they make it about them? Do they specifically call people out to give kudos? But like, it's the them versus I kind of conversation. If they're only talking about like what they bring to the table, that's a red flag. If they are very like, this is my team and I'm so proud of them and this is really cool and I love getting, like, the way that they show up as a thought leader is going to, that can be manipulated from a PR perspective. So but if they're definitely out there and it's their entire thought leadership is, look how smart I am, imagine what they're like behind closed doors.
Yeah, there's moments on LinkedIn feeds where I think, oh boy. So
yeah, like don't put me in a meeting room with you.
Yeah, there was one that I think they were a hiring officer, whatever the case may be, but they hired someone who had been out of the workforce for a while, and they were patting themselves on the back for hiring a woman into a senior position, and I was just kind of like, wow.
You're telling on yourself.
Wow. Like, what is wrong with you? Anyways, and it had, I'm not saying that likes and hearts and blah, blah, blah are the be all and end all of the world that some people maybe make it out to be or whatever, right? But they had a lot of support, like, wow, you're a really good person. And I thought, no, they're not. They just hired someone who is qualified. What is going on here? I don't know. It was shocking to me. Yeah, I think there's also rankings of things like great places to work rankings, and we're fortunate that Brock is on that list regularly. And I mean, this is not intended to be a Brock Employment Booster Club discussion, obviously, but when you do work somewhere that lands on those rankings, it does make you feel good. But I also know that some people worry that those kinds of rankings can be like bought and paid for, or awards in certain industries can be paid for if you buy a table at the awards and that kind of thing. So there's probably a lot of like pessimism when it comes to awards and, which certifications do we trust, and what is a certified B Corp mean, or what does a certified living wage employer mean, and stuff like that. So one thing I mean, again, this is my sort of personal take. I often find if you are certified by a third party, then I tend to have a lot more faith in you versus, we're a really good place to work, we promise. Or we're like a family. It usually means
run.
I think Mark, referenced like reach out to people. I mean, access to people has never been as easy as it is today, right? I mean, we're all on LinkedIn. I respond to people that reach out to me. I mean, reach out to someone that works at Brock or that works at RSM. People will talk to you about their experience. I mean, I genuinely believe, again, maybe I'm a little too altruistic, but people do want to help. So if you reach out, ask some questions, you'll get an answer back, and it'll either reinforce or it'll reinforce good or bad, right? Your instinct, right? So I mean, I think about when I was applying for, anyway, not to make it about me, but like the world has evolved. Like LinkedIn didn't exist. You like faxed your resume somewhere, or it's so today that there's so much information available on different organizations, and trust your instincts. That's the other thing. Like, right, follow your values and trust your instincts.
Yeah, I hear from soon-to-be grads or new grads that they'd like to work for a nice place or a nice company, but they're more worried about paying off student debt and bills. And so I regularly hear, I'll work for a nice company later on after I've made some money, and that makes me kind of sad because like I don't know, maybe overly idealistic that I think, but there has to be companies that will treat you well and pay you well. It shouldn't.
They're out there. They're
right.
out there.
And I thought, oh, I feel really bad if you think you have to work in sort of hellish conditions for 10 years and then, you know, whatever, take your stock plan and your pension and then go work somewhere nice. It's like, you only kind of get one shot at this. And if you spend 10 years of your life, you know, being really upset that your alarm clock's going off or whatever, then I feel bad when I hear that. I wanted to, we're actually done with audience questions. So there was one question I had left on my sheet, and I wondered about how do you communicate both internally and externally about responsible management and responsible practices. We know that there's risks with greenwashing, and there's local washing, and there's pink washing, and there's rainbow washing, and there's every other potential form of washing that will emerge as we go. How do you communicate about things like this effectively and sort of remove that I think we have inherent skepticism. I'm probably guilty of it too, because I do research in this area. So I feel like, okay, companies are often saying, we're good, trust us, or we did some good, believe us. What do you think the best practices are for communication?
For me, it comes, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I would say, you know, there's sort of two thoughts here. You know, one is communicating externally, and that's just being clear and authentic and accountable to what you're communicating. But I think more importantly is your internal communications strategy. You know, your employees will create their own story if you don't tell them the story that, you know, the company. So, you know, I think having a clear narrative and also repeating it so that people really understand, and then showing how you're demonstrating, you know, how you're living those ways is really important. So it's not just, you know, put it on a boardroom wall or send it, you know, talk about it at a town hall or in all staff and move forward. It's got to really translate through every meeting and through every function, and just be crystal clear, because I've seen it so many times where if you're not clear on a stance or you know, on a particular topic, that people just create their own narrative, and that can leak into the world kind of outside the four walls of your business.
I agree with that. I like to call it the 5-year-old test. Any comms internally and externally has to pass the 5-year-old test. So you explain it, they say why. You explain it again, they say why. You explain it, they go through like 4 or 5 layers of like why, and it gets to the heart of why you're doing things. And so if it can't pass the 5-year-old test, then you're going to have problems.
I would say 2 words: authenticity, right? And Mark just referenced that, and intentionality, right? And then you have to live by it. So you can say it all day long, but then your behaviors have to follow it, and that reinforces it. So
that 5-year-old test, it's taking me back 4 years to my Liam's 9. I'm like, oh yeah, I did answer that question a lot. But yeah,
for comms, it works with everything. Is the messaging clear? 5-year-old test.
Yeah.
Can I easily explain something that's really esoteric? 5-year-old test.
Yeah, I guess if the company's or client's first answer is, it's going to make us look good. It's sort of,
not the right answer.
And it'll stick. Like Mark was talking about the story. If people can understand the why, they'll be more passionate about it. They'll be more likely to join in, and they'll understand it, and it'll be stickier with them.
Yeah.
But if the why winds up being like for PR, because everyone else is doing it, then you got to reevaluate. Like, why are we really doing this? And that's why that's where the greenwashing, the pink washing, the rainbow washing, like the jokes of like after Pride Month's over, all the logos are going to change. That's because the why, when you got down to every single layer, it was, well, this is what we're supposed to do. Everyone else is doing it.
Yeah, and I did sort of wonder when I was, I would never recommend this, but I manually coded 4,500 print ads as part of my dissertation. Anyways, oof, rough, no fun. Anyways, when I was doing it, I had Earth Day was some of the months of the magazines, and it was just flooded with beautiful shades of green from every single brand and so on. And then those brands didn't talk about them at any other point in the rest of the year. And I thought, okay, yes, there's some focus because it's Earth Day or it's Earth Month. So yes, we'll focus. The CN Tower is green, or Niagara Falls are lit up green, or something like that. So it's front of mind. But then I wondered, it sort of doesn't look like you care about it outside of that month, and you're just sort of doing it because you feel like it's expected of you and you have to do it. So I think consistency to communication and activities, and not just saying, okay, if we have a rainbow avatar in June, people will think that we support Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus communities, for example. I think TD one year had profiles of customers every single month. It was sort of like the customer of the month. And it made a lot of, well, I can't say what I think exactly because I like hosting this panel discussion, but and we want to do year 11. But it was just, I would say, sort of small-minded people losing their minds that there was a gay couple who were customers of the TD Bank. And I was like, okay, you didn't think anyone from that community banked at the same bank? Okay, interesting, fair enough. But they did it all year. And I felt like, yeah, okay. And it's sort of like when companies do a cause-related marketing campaign for one day, and they're saying, okay, here's 20 cents from this $100 t-shirt. I think there needs to be a real commitment in saying, we're not just relying on you to do the right thing. We're going to do some of the right thing too, or we're right there with you doing the right thing. And we're not going to make a 500% markup on this rainbow hockey jersey because we can to look good. And so I would just try and encourage more companies to show that they're committed to it, but actually committed, not saying, yeah, we signed up for this great agreement and we're going to change some lives, but then got a little awkward, or we didn't make as much money this year. So yeah,
I mean,
notice. I don't know.
I would say though, like you got to kind of ladder up to your values, and it's not a bad thing that the CN Tower turns green on Earth Day, or that brands participate. Like, raising awareness for these causes is not a bad thing, but I think you have to be true to what your purpose is. And sometimes this is the thing that we do, and so we're going to have a 12-month program to support this cause, or sometimes it's just we are doing this for a day because it ladders up to our values. And it's an off and on, and just be clear about it. Like, it's we shouldn't all be so skeptical, because it is tough to pick a pick a cause to support. And the bigger your company, the more voices you have internally, and the more it opens your eyes to just causes you may have not even known. So there is some positiveness to it, but you have to be authentic about it.
Yeah, sorry, I was sort of thinking of the companies that do it once and then sort of
never can.
Yeah. So the person who introduced you and I, Mark, to work on the panel, Trent, he shows this ad of Audi. Their big Super Bowl ad was about women's rights, and it was the ad with the young girl who wins the soapbox car race. And then Trent used to show that. We're talking about a mystery person named Trent right now. I know that probably makes no sense. Anyways, he would show this ad to my students and say, oh, by the way, did you know that Audi's global board doesn't have a single female board member?
Yeah. But
their cause for the Super Bowl that year was, empowering young women to go into STEM and stuff. And I was like, okay, well, that's awkward. Unless you look into it, you wouldn't really know that. So
right.
It's very complicated. And I also realize there's I think there's 150,000 registered nonprofits in Canada, or registered charities, maybe more. And we're not the hugest country, obviously, in the world. So there's so many good causes. And I notice too, sometimes companies get ripped for not supporting every single cause. It's like, okay, well, you did this, but why didn't you also do that? Or why didn't you do this? Therefore, I don't think you're a good quote unquote good company, kind of thing. So it's really complicated. And yeah, I guess is that a really bad way to end it? It's kind of a cop-out. It's very complicated. We need
It's nuanced.
Yes, it's part 2 and 3 forthcoming on responsible. No, overall, what I wanted to say was thank you to everyone for amazing conversation, thoughtful conversation. We're 1 minute past what we were supposed to. I'm sure we could talk for longer, but we won't keep you here any longer. So thank you so much for your engagement and your willingness to take part. A really quick thank you to Susan, Kate, and Erica, who I work with every year on Business Matters on making it work behind the scenes. And thank you for the audience questions as well. I hope more people will begin to think about responsible management and responsible leadership and the importance of it as we move forward, because there's a lot of things to tackle as we move forward. So take care, everyone. I hope you have a safe and easy, well, you don't have a random thunder and lightning ice storm, Christina, so you're probably safe at home, I think. So just for the rest of us who might be driving through a weird random.
Be safe.
Yeah. Alrighty, take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.